Hi there, everyone. Thanks for joining this WisPolitics-State Affairs virtual luncheon, assessing the U.S. and international energy landscape in time of war. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors for the Milwaukee event series: HBS Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Transportation Builders Association, UW-Milwaukee, the Medical College of Wisconsin, and Spectrum. They will also be the sponsors at two in-person events focusing on boosting Wisconsin defense industry jobs. That one's on April 15th in Milwaukee, and AI and the healthcare workforce. That will be in Milwaukee on May 5th. Stay tuned for announcements on the venues and how to register. And a special thanks to an additional sponsor for this event. It's a group called Natural Allies for a Clean Energy Future. And please note that Thursday's State Affairs virtual event, also on energy, affordability, and meeting demand. You can see the chat box a little later for how to register for that free event for State Affairs. WisPolitics is now part of the State Affairs Network, a nonpartisan network going from Massachusetts to California. So check that out, please. Today's event will last about an hour. We will allow some time for questions from you, the attendees. Just enter them through the chat box on the bottom of your screen. Now, today's topic is complex, and you might think it's a bit of a stretch beyond our state borders, but Wisconsin and the U.S. are wrapped up in the world energy market, so what happens over there can and does affect us over here. Plus, we have some top Wisconsin experts to guide us through these confusing times. As a backdrop to this energy shock, we have an increasing concern among voters about energy price, availability, and sourcing. Clear majorities in a December poll say they're concerned about their economic situation, that their electric bills are higher than a year ago, that affordability is a top concern, and that natural gas is an important energy source in meeting those concerns. You can find the full poll results at naturalallysforcleanenergy.org. Go to the website, go to the menu box, hit research, and you'll find the Wisconsin poll. And now to our panel. Really appreciate all of you taking time to do this. We have a lot of expertise here. We have two ex-U.S. ambassadors. Rick Graber, he was an ambassador to the Czech Republic in a GOP administration, and he's also head of the Bradley Foundation. We have former Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett. He was the U.S. ambassador to Luxembourg in a Democratic administration. We have Peter Barca, former Democratic lawmaker, congressman, and cabinet secretary. He now represents Natural Allies for a Clean Energy Future. And Kristin Gilkes, she's executive director of the Customers First Coalition. So thank you, panel. Thank you very much for attending today. Well, like I said, it's a complex topic. I kind of want to start with the news of the day, and I think this goes to the diplomats who can maybe interpret what the heck's going on. So, are there negotiations between the U.S. and Iran? Is that actually happening, or is it, as the Iranians, or the official Iranian response was, fake news? Rick, why don't you take a first stab at
Sure.
this?
I mean, Tom and I are obviously not privy to classified information anymore, so this is just a guess. We'll try to make it as educated a guess as possible. My guess is there are some conversations going on at some level. From all the news that you read, there's been very little communication seen or heard from the new supreme leader in Iran. Maybe there's some splintering going on. Maybe there's some tactics going on by President Trump and the Iranians. Very hard to know. But my guess is there's probably something there and probably some conversation going on at some level between senior officials from the United States and Iran.
So I don't know if there would be direct conversations between the United States and Iran. I think clearly Egypt and
Could be through intermediaries. You're right.
Egypt, Pakistan, Turkey, they have all shown a strong interest in trying to broker a deal. I think fundamentally the challenge here that we face is when you whack a hornet's nest, oftentimes it's the hornets who decide when the fighting ends. And we have whacked the hornet's nest. I don't think anybody would dispute that. And so we may say, all right, we're ready to have it end. The question is, how does the leadership in Iran feel? Do they feel as though they have a growing advantage because of the economic stranglehold that they have created in the Strait of Hormuz? I think that there might be diverging goals between our interests and Benjamin Netanyahu's interests. But I agree with Rick that I think that somewhere there are conversations going on.
Okay, before we get to the rest of the panel, I want to sort of set the context for uh, the ex-ambassadors here. So, Tom, when you were most recently ambassador to Luxembourg, you were very involved with NATO and the Ukraine war. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you think your former colleagues are thinking about right now?
I think their heads are exploding, I think, in a word. Um, when I think of my arriving in Luxembourg, it was literally 2 weeks before Russia invaded Ukraine. And the issue then, which seems like a million years ago, was what happens to the Nord Stream pipeline? And we put a lot of pressure, as others did, to have Europe move away from using Russian oil. And we were very successful at that. And so the amount of Russian oil used in Europe dropped substantially last year in particular. It dropped at probably 45%. So now Europe is facing this dilemma because we in the United States basically get 1% of our supply through the straits. Europe gets a significantly larger amount, and the Asian countries get an even larger amount. So in terms of direct impact on a day-to-day basis in homes and businesses, it's hitting Europe much harder than it's hitting the United States.
Okay, now Rick, when you were ambassador to the Czech Republic, you were very involved again with the Russians at the time in regards to controversies over missile placement. So can I explain maybe your role in that and how that might lessons from that to today?
Sure. And it's an indicator that things just haven't changed over a long period of time. I served in Prague from 2006 to 2009, and the issue that I worked on every day for almost 3 years was an effort by President Bush to place missile interceptors in Poland and a radar in the Czech Republic to protect against Iranian rockets. There was deep concern at that time that Iran, even then, was developing the technology to hit Europe and then ultimately perhaps the United States, which is why George Bush proceeded with this effort. The Russians hated it. It was too close to home, and they led a very orchestrated effort to kill this effort in many ways, to defeat the effort. And ultimately, they were successful. We got very, very close to having that missile defense system in place. It had been approved by the Czech lower house, or excuse me, by the Czech upper house, by the Czech Senate, never came to a vote in the lower house. And then it got late in the election cycle, and it became pretty clear that there was likely to be a change in parties in the White House. And indeed, Barack Obama became president, and the effort died. And ultimately, one of the early actions of President Obama was to put an end to this discussion of a missile defense system. But you do have to wonder, had we been successful, how would have all this unfolded? What would have happened in Ukraine? What would have happened with the Iranians if this system had been in place?
Right. I mean, there is a connection, as I think we've just seen here, between Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, and now the war in Iran.
Yes.
Okay, so let's I think we all it's again it's a complex situation, so I'm going to go to a simplified question. What are the current winners and losers in your view on this. I want to go for all the panelists here. Who are the current winners and losers? And then we can go to the long-term winners and losers because maybe they're different. Um, so why don't we start off with you, Peter? Peter Barca?
Well, the biggest winner is U.S. natural gas suppliers. The Washington Post had an interesting story just a day or so ago talking about just the demand growing exponentially. The biggest losers are consumers, both in the United States and around the world, because we've seen at the U.S. natural allies for clean energy just an unprecedented demand for new energy. I mean, it's just remarkable to look just from one year from 24 to 25 in terms of the growth and demand for energy. And it's gone up just at record paces. And I think that's true around the world too, as more and more people use more and more devices every day for their daily life. And with AI and all Google and all the other tricks of the trade we all use when we use our cell phones every day. Qatar is obviously a huge loser. They lost 70% of their capacity with a bombing that took place, and they've estimated it'll take 3 to 5 years to replace that. Japan's vice minister for international affairs indicated how 80% of the natural gas that goes through the Strait of Hormuz goes to Asia. So to some degree, they're bigger losers. But as Jeff Meyer said in an article yesterday, all of those prices are harmonized. So everybody's going to pay more, even though like America and most of Europe doesn't necessarily get most of their gas from that strait in particular. So I think that's sort of a roundup of where things stand now, but it's really hard to predict longer term because depending on how long this war goes, how many more sites are bombed, how much damage is done, whether or not the straits can be fully open and have ships passing through, whether that take a month, 2 months, 3 months, is totally unpredictable. But those are some of the immediate winners and losers.
Okay, Kristin from Customers First Coalition.
Yes, customers first. I should note we focus a lot on electricity at Customers First, but I think obviously as we talk about this, I'm going to include drivers and people impacted by gas prices and especially natural gas prices. And I wanted to also acknowledge, and I think we all do acknowledge the costs of this war that are like human costs. We appreciate the service members and their families and the civilians who are paying costs much greater than the energy costs we're talking about. So I wanted to start off by saying that and as well. So when we're talking about winners and losers, I want to be a little careful with those terms as well. But for winners, I think planners, people and organizations who are pre-planners who saw this coming, right? We have known for years that Iran is a threat and that global energy markets are volatile. So people who planned ahead, invested in energy efficiency, utilities that have invested in diversified energy resources for their portfolio, and utilities who are using strategies like hedging, long-term contracts, and energy storage in order to help mitigate the price spikes for customers directly. And then for losers, I don't want to say losers necessarily, but I do want to say the people most impacted. Peter mentioned customers, but people who are most exposed to volatile energy prices. In Wisconsin, low and middle income customers can pay a larger share of the energy burden. So a larger share of their household income is going to their energy bills. In Wisconsin, natural gas customers, about 60% of the cost of their bill is directly related to fuel costs. And for electricity customers, about 20% of the total bill cost is related to the fuel cost of generation. So that's how customers are exposed. And I think some of the most exposed customers are those low to middle income customers, as well as I was thinking about rural customers who are in large part relying on propane to fuel their homes. And propane is exposed to even more volatile energy pricing. So rural customers who rely on propane, and then rural customers who just drive more miles and who are experiencing higher gas prices more acutely because of that.
Or who use
Just as
diesel for their farm equipment or
yes,
need fertilizer,
yes,
affordable
thank you.
fertilizer as we enter growing season. I wonder, Kristen, what you think of the large and industrial users and the small businesses in terms of the energy crunch.
I mean, obviously, we want to keep their costs as low as possible so that consumers are paying lower costs when, down the line when they're making their purchases. I think it hits them hardest. I mean, I've heard of larger customers who have energy bills over $1 million a month. So these fuel costs can really directly impact them. And obviously we want to help sort of mitigate those shocks through effective utility regulation that encourages utilities to do that long-term planning, use hedging, use long-term contracts to help keep those prices as low as possible.
Right. Okay. So, Tom, what do you think are the short-term winners and
For the
losers?
short term, and I don't know how short the short term is. I think without a doubt, politically, the biggest short term winner right now is Benjamin Netanyahu, because I think that this is almost his dream coming to reality. His dream to completely destabilize Iran, to go into Lebanon. He's getting everything that he's ever wanted. And he has a very willing partner right now with the United States and with President Trump. And so what he has been trying to do throughout his career, obviously, is on behalf of his country, is to thwart Iran. And so he's a huge winner. I think Vladimir Putin is a huge winner in all of this. The fact that we have now taken our foot off the gas pedal in terms of stopping their flow of oil and gas, I think is oil in particular is really significant, and I think he's got to be just clapping every day. The losers, I think, and I think the prior speakers have referred to this, is consumers in the United States, certainly, consumers in Europe. Asian countries are going to be affected as well. Ironically, I think one of the winners short term, I don't know how long it is over the weekend, I looked at the stock prices for the 5 major oil companies in the United States, and they all went up significantly in the last 28 days. And this is all a reflection of when worldwide supply is curtailed by 20%, when your supply contracts like that, and the demand stays the same, the price is going to go up, and that's exactly what's happening. So that's in the short term. In the long term, it still is anybody's guess. What is our end game in Iran? Are we going to be successful in having a regime change? Are we going to be successful in making the Strait of Hormuz safe for travel? And when will we make it safe for travel? And who has to do that? Is that our burden? Is that the burden of other countries? That's obviously one of the points President Trump has been making is it should be Australia and Japan and China who are helping, and they're not helping right now.
Rick?
Just to echo what most of the prior speakers have said, I think the big winner currently is Russia. With sanctions removed on oil, with the price of oil up, that's good for Russia. That helps them fund and fuel this war against Ukraine. If Russia's doing well, a loser is obviously Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, which is unfortunate in many respects. Certainly consumers in the short term are losers. The Iranian people are losers in all of this. I think there is a lust for change in that country, and I hope it comes about. But they're losing, and they're struggling through all this. China, Asia, obviously, Europe to a little bit lesser extent, are current losers. And as Kristin said at the outset, permanent losers are sadly the families of the fallen soldiers. And all of our thoughts should be with these brave people and the families for what they're going through.
I think we all agree about that, Rick. Thank you.
No question.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about China with the two ex-diplomats here. So China is getting their allies with Russia, so they're getting oil and natural gas from Russia. So the Asian impact of this is less on China than other Asian countries.
I
Yeah.
think it still has a significant impact in China. And again, it can go to Russia, and it has gone to Russia. And this is gonna allow Russia, though, to raise its price. And so China is going to be paying more for its oil and gas as well.
Rick, on China?
Yeah, I agree with Tom on that. It's still a global market. There's going to be an impact on China, no matter what. It's been very interesting to watch China's muted response in all of this in many ways. Switching gears a little bit, and Tom talked a little bit about longtime winners and losers in all this. I mean, if President Trump is right on this, there's at least an opportunity for a major reordering of the world in a very significant way. If there's a regime change or a change of heart in Iran, Iran has been very dangerous, and I lived this for 3 years. These people hate America. All parties have said for 47 years that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. There's only been one president, and there are plenty of things that Donald Trump says and does that I don't agree with. I think he made the right call on this one. And if indeed the Iranians were only a matter of weeks away from a nuclear weapon, he had a tough, but I believe correct call to make. Time will tell. But if the Middle East is reordered, if Iran is reordered, it's a safer world and it's a safer country for the United States. Again, we don't know how this is going to end, but there is at least a potential for a dramatically better world, and hopefully not the too distant future.
Well, just to make this a little juicy,
Sure. Why not?
I have to admit that when President Trump walked away from the deal that President Obama had negotiated to try to curtail this threat through diplomacy, I thought, this is the kind of world I want to live in, where diplomacy rather than war is the toolbox that we use to do it. And clearly, President Trump derided that agreement and decided that he was going to take the battle to Iran. This is going to have to end at some point through diplomacy. And I think we're a better world when we try to resolve these things without going to war.
Totally agree, Tom, but the Barack Obama's Iran deal didn't work. Wasn't working at all.
I think
the Iranians ignored that. They were developing a new nuclear weapon. Making the world more dangerous.
We had inspectors from many different countries who
weren't allowed to inspect.
But they were allowed to inspect. They were not allowed to inspect after we left that agreement. That's when it ended. There were inspectors until we walked away from that agreement.
Okay, well,
I think we all agree that clearly.
Tom and I are longtime friends. We know this.
No, that's okay. I mean, because this is at the heart. This is at the heart of, is it appropriate to go to war at this time?
It's a real.
Anyway, Peter, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add one small point. I mean, clearly, I think we all agree that whenever you can effectively achieve something through diplomacy, I mean, in the end of this game, obviously, the president's already talking that he's entering into diplomacy with some leaders in Iran. Whether it's correct leaders is hard to really tell. But, certainly I agree with Rick, and I pray Rick's right. I mean, I hope we end with regime change. That would be far better. But, at least as we sit here today, that looks like a distant probability. It looks very unlikely that's going to occur. I hope it does. If it doesn't occur, though, then, anytime you enter into war, you create all this hatred and you create all of these terrorists that develop that just despise the country because so many of their brothers and sisters and cousins have been killed and injured. And that's the ugly part of war. that's so unfortunate. Now, again, let me just end by saying I pray that Rick's right about that. That would certainly be a tremendous outcome. But in the interim, there's a lot of risk. I have a niece that's in the Marines. I hope to God they don't send people, soldiers, on foot into the into that type of territory. And we've already had soldiers pay the ultimate sacrifice, and so it's extremely worrisome where this might be going. So I'm hoping and praying also that this diplomacy will be successful.
Okay, I'm going to. I appreciate all that discussion. I want to talk a little bit more about the energy landscape here because I'm wondering. So we were at a price where oil and gas prices were very low. Okay, so now we're not just talking about oil, we're talking about natural gas, and then we're talking about the effects on the global economy, and well, that could affect our economy too. So I'm wondering about Kristin, about how does this help? Maybe does it help renewables? Does it help natural gas? Does it help nuclear? Does it change the thinking on the energy mix in Wisconsin?
So, the energy mix in Wisconsin was sort of already in the midst of this transition towards a more diversified portfolio. And I think we've been moving in the right direction and will continue to move in the right direction. Wisconsin's utilities and the governor have set goals that we will use 100% carbon-free energy by 2050, which creates a large degree of energy independence as well. So just a couple of facts and figures that were in the Public Service Commission's most recent strategic energy assessment. Back just in 2015, coal was making up 51% of our energy mix. Now it's down to 31%. In 2015, natural gas was at 19%. Now it's up to 36%. Wind was at 6%. Now it's up to 11%. And solar was at 0.1% in 2015. It's now up to 2%, and with a bunch of recent approvals, there will be much more on the horizon. So we've already been diversifying, and I think that is going to continue to grow. Wind and solar will continue to grow. We'll see more investments in things like long-term energy storage, renewed focus on small nuclear reactors and fusion research that's happening right here at UW-Madison. So I do think that we were on this track, and maybe this type of conflict gives us a little incentive to keep going, go further, faster. But we were on this path, and we'll continue to head there.
Just
So
to
Peter,
dovetail on that, if you don't mind.
yeah. I'm just going to ask you. Natural gas has been the bridge fuel, if you will, from coal, in many respects, from coal to the renewables here in Wisconsin. And do you think this energy shock is going to accelerate that, or how will it affect natural gas as the bridge fuel?
Well, I think it will. I mean, the one thing we all agree on is that everybody wants to move away from coal into renewables, as Kristin indicated, wind, solar, and natural gas as well, because it's essential to have a bridge to be able to get to a carbon-free type of environment by 2050. So as a consequence, in fact, we did a poll, the poll you referenced at the beginning of the show, 66% overall agree with that type of an approach. And when you talk about just moving away from coal to natural gas alone, you get 79% of Republicans, 78% of Democrats, and 76% of independents. You don't see that much agreement on any issue. So that's really a plus, thankfully. And I think that people are, by and large, want to see that transition occur. Fortunately, I know like We Energies and the other energy companies in Wisconsin also support that. They're moving in that direction, which is a real plus. And so I think that it will continue to push in that direction. I did note, though, that Governor Kathy Hochul had just, hinted in the news a day or two ago that she may need to extend the time period before New York can reach, a fully carbon-free environment, which, of course, has caused quite a stir there. So the question is, how long will it really take? Krista mentioned 2050 as our goal in Wisconsin. And, We'd like to see us stay on track for those type of goals if possible.
So did she cite this energy crunch as a reason for that?
She did. I mean, not strictly the issue of this war, although I think that was an element in what she was saying. But additionally, just the demand. I mentioned earlier that there's just an unprecedented growth in demand for energy. I mean, it's so interesting. The slope of the lines in terms of demand just from one year to the next, grew, exponentially.
Okay,
I'll just
well, go ahead,
add
Kristin.
one more thing, Jeff, and that we talked about like renewables and energy generation, that may change because of this, but there's also kind of this movement towards getting the most out of the energy grid, using energy efficiency and using measures like grid enhancing technologies in order to make sure that we're making the best use of the existing infrastructure. And so I think that's going to play a really big role moving forward too, that we kind of like do that first, and you can do that pretty cost effectively, to make sure that not only are we adding carbon-free resources, we're getting the most out of the power grid that we already have.
Jeff, real quickly, I think there's two things fundamentally going back directly to the war. If you look back to the shocks of the 1970s on 73 and 79, at that time, we were, of course, an energy importer. Now we're an energy exporter in large part because of natural gas. And so that fundamentally changes the dynamic here as to what the impact will be on our country economically. And I think the other factor is back in the 1970s, as a percentage of our gross domestic product, we spent much more on energy than we do today. It's gotten more efficient over the last 50 years. And so the consumers are being hurt, small businesses are being hurt. But I don't at this juncture today, and that could change, see where the economy at large is going to have the type of negative response that you saw in the 1970s. Again,
because we're less dependent on
we're less dependent, and we're an
Mid-East
exporter.
oil.
Yeah, we're an exporter. I mean, I was listening to a podcast the other day that talked about Texas and how it's going to get $1 billion more in tax revenue over the next few years because of the increases in prices that the gas producing states, they're going to make out like bandits in this thing if the price continues to be high.
Okay, I want to also talk about this. Peter, you mentioned the liquefied natural gas element, and Tom, you did too, in regards to how that is affecting Europe. Now, so there was in Qatar, there was a facility that was attacked, and it wasn't destroyed, but certainly its production would be limited even if if the war ended tomorrow. So just talk a little bit about U.S. liquefied natural gas and versus the Mideast supply of liquefied natural gas, if you can, Peter.
Well, that Qatar facility, they had a 17% drop in capacity as a consequence. Even like long-term contracts, they cited Italy, Belgium, South Korea, China are all going to be impacted. So as Tom had indicated, we are now a net exporter. So that demand is going to grow even more significantly as a consequence. So that's a huge plus overall for our economy. One statistic, going back to what a couple people talked about, the impact on low-income people, that I do want to mention, though, when I was a member of the National FEMA board, one of the statistics that was used, and this is about 12 years ago, it's only gotten worse. Back then, it was 62% of Americans could not survive a $500 emergency hit in the form of a natural disaster. Now it's 66%. So think about that. So small increases in energy prices desperately affect them. And last year in the United States, energy costs went up, 13% nationwide. And so, Kristin had mentioned, rightfully so, and it's good that her group is really focused on this. But low-income people desperately do need us to be focused on helping to hold down their costs. And all these initiatives that we have, I think, will have a very important impact.
Okay, does
Do
everybody
we all
agree?
agree that fossil fuels aren't going away anytime soon, though? Wind and solar are, have been heavily subsidized, but are still largely fringe. Uh, and from a United States perspective, to inoculate ourselves against price increases, it seems to me the answer is to produce more oil and gas.
I
Well,
mean,
go ahead.
I will say that there's definitely people that disagree with you. But I will say that I agree that oil and gas are going to play a role, at least in the short term. And I do think they are a bridge fuel. Natural gas, it has these attributes where it can be ramped up and down quickly. So if the wind starts blowing and you've got like a large scale wind farm that comes online, you can ramp down your gas plants pretty quickly and efficiently. And they work well together. I think as more large scale battery storage comes online, and there is like really innovative stuff going on in the storage space. I think as more of that comes online, I think you'll see some dynamics shift, but I think it would be, I mean, the reality of the situation is that we're still getting a lot of energy generation from fossil fuels, and hopefully we can make them as clean as possible. Gas is a lot cleaner burning relative to coal. And they had already done a lot of work to clean up the coal emissions profiles as well. But yes, it's a complicated topic.
Sort of like a
I'll let others chime in as well.
hybrid car versus a full electric car.
I think
To some degree, although, yeah, go ahead, Tom.
I think the supply issue, the answer to the supply issue has been and will be for a long time, all of the above. And I think the other reality is all forms of energy have been subsidized. And so I think it's the government picking winners and losers. I think under Democrats, they push more towards the renewables. I think obviously under President Trump, he doesn't like the renewables. And so I think that we haven't reached the equilibrium, but in reality, the answer is all of the above.
Yeah, the one thing I would say, though, our polling shows, though, the one part that's not true about all of the above is coal. Virtually everybody agrees it's time to phase out use of coal. Our energy companies are moving in that direction, rightfully so. And natural gas, of course, is cleaner. It's more efficient. And we have an abundance of supply of it. So that's the one change I would project there. And to bring it closer to home in Wisconsin, it's good that we've grown from 6% to 11%. But, we're ripe for wind energy here in Wisconsin. Our neighbors, Minnesota, Iowa, all get over 20% of their energy from wind. And so I'm hoping that over the course of the next couple of years that we see a change in Madison in direction in terms of much more support for the development of wind energy. I always thought it was so ironic as a lawmaker, as a minority leader, we were passing all these bills to make it easier to take wind towers and turbines and easing the transportation rules so they could ship them out of state, which of course made sense. But it's like, what a shame we couldn't use them right here in Wisconsin. So that's one thing bringing it close to home that we have a lot of room for growth in.
Peter, I'm not saying that people love coal. I'm saying I think the reality of the world is the supply is going to be all of the above, not what people want. I think what people want ideally is anything that doesn't affect them.
Yes,
Well, they want costs. They want
totally
costs
agree with
Lower
low.
prices.
They want
Yes.
affordability and reliability. Those are the two things that people all want.
Okay, well, does what's going on now threaten reliability at all, or just affordability for U.S. citizens?
Both, frankly. I mean, more so on the affordability front, reliability because we are energy independent. But as costs go up, that affects supply too, because it's one of the reasons why it's important here in Wisconsin that we continue building power plants, because if we don't have enough energy produced in Wisconsin, then we go to the grid and diesel, and we're buying outside fuel at much higher costs. So in the coldest days in the winter and the hottest days in the summer, we want to make sure that we have enough supply there to keep costs more reasonable.
Okay, we're going to go to questions soon from the audience. So if you have a question in your audience member, go to the chat box there in the lower part of your screen and type in your question, and then we'll do our best to answer it. Go ahead. I interrupted you, Kristin.
Okay, now I just lost my train of thought. Sorry, Peter, what did you just say?
Oh, that's okay. I was just talking about affordability and reliability,
Oh,
being essential, and that the price does, certainly affect those issues.
right. Let's leave it at that.
Okay, but also if the price goes up, I think there are some producers in the United States who, because the price wasn't sufficiently high, didn't weren't producing. And so, I mean, back to your point, Rick, I mean, and about the U.S. being a net exporter, and not letting go of fossil fuels just yet, this price increase could indeed spur even more production.
Certainly possible. Yeah, I mean, it just makes common sense. The way to protect against stuff we cannot control beyond our borders is to produce more.
Right. So, yeah, I think that some of us here do remember the oil shocks of the 70s and long lines at the gas pumps and other things when U.S. was more highly dependent, certainly,
I
on
don't
Middle
think we're
East
going to
oil.
see that.
Yeah.
Hope not.
Okay. And now, before we go to questions, I'm going to just ask a general topic here. I think we've touched on it, but what about the danger of uh, this energy shock affecting the world economy and then affecting the U.S. economy? Are we endangering a global recession? Or is that what could be the result of this? Or as Tom suggested, if this doesn't go on too long, it won't affect the U.S. much. I'd like people to weigh in on that before we get into our questions. Who wants to start?
Well, I'll start. Certainly there is a risk that, and I'm sure that the administration has taken that into its calculation. But I go back to the point I made before. I think in all these conversations, we are dismissing the very real threat that existed from Iran, the very real threat that thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people could lose their lives because of this regime in Iran. And we get into all this discussion about consumer costs, which is enormously important. But at the end of the day, the president had to make a very tough call. And if indeed the threat was real as has been reported, when you weigh the two, you've got to come down on the side of protecting this country and our allies. At least that's where I came down. I think he made the right call. But is there an economic threat? Absolutely. Yes.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the one thing I would say is, tough to say right call, wrong call, but I think it's always important that you involve your allies more. I think the one huge mistake the president made was not reaching out to our allies. And we're seeing it now when he asked for our closest allies to send ships to the Strait of Hormuz and to help to keep that open and safe. He's not getting the kind of cooperation. And that's where diplomacy, we got two diplomats here, plays such a huge role. I mean, that was just a huge mistake that he did not involve our allies. And it's threatening our long-term relationships. And that threatens the economy. It threatens the U.S. economy because of depending on what happens with the value of the dollar. I saw just yesterday that China's made some moves.
I don't totally disagree, Peter. I would have handled many things differently than were handled. It does appear that the Europeans in recent days are being more cooperative in terms of use of bases and so forth. I would have done things differently had I been in that role.
But I trust that's true.
Here's where we are, though. We're right now, no one likes the leadership in Iran on this call. Nobody thinks that they're horrible, horrible, horrible people. We can all agree on that.
Yes.
What's coming next? So what we talk about the soldiers who have died already. Are there going to be more soldiers who die? Are we going to stay in this for the long haul until there's a regime change? Is that the end game? I don't see that coming out of President Trump's mouth today. I hear it coming out of Benjamin Netanyahu's mouth today, or words to that effect. So I think it's one thing to say we don't like them. They're bad people. They were bad to their own people. They were terrorists to the world. But then what's the next step? And that's where this gets dangerous because at some point, I think politically, President Trump is going to feel the heat of rising gas prices. And he's going to look for a way to get out of this. And it could be days, it could be weeks. I don't think it's going to be much longer than that because these gas prices are going to stay high and it's going to affect the midterms. So he's either going to say, all right, we're going to stay here till the regime changes. Oh my God. I think that requires boots on the ground. And I don't see him doing that. And I don't see the American people supporting that.
I
Well,
think they
right
have to
now,
completely dismantle their nuclear capability.
He
And
said
whatever,
that in June. That's what he
whatever it takes to
said.
do that is what he ought to do, and I hope he sticks to it.
But didn't he say that in June? We did that in June.
Well, there have been a lot of people of both parties that have said that for 47 years, and no one's ever done anything until now.
But no, what I'm saying is in June, when he announced the strikes in June, he declared victory. We've dismantled them.
Obviously wasn't the case.
Obviously, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. So I don't know that we've done it now.
Well, we're closer.
Well, I don't know what to believe at this point.
Mhm. But going back to your question, Jeff, in terms of prices and the impact in the U.S. and the world economy, depending on the length of this war, it clearly could have a huge impact. I mean, one thing you have to say about President Trump, he is sensitive to oil prices. And, so as a consequence, as Tom just indicated, that certainly will weigh on his decisions. Already, he's lifted sanctions on Russia, which is so hurtful, I think, to all of us on this call, because I trust we all, strongly support Ukraine in that war. And last thing we want to do is provide more money to Russia to help them to be successful in that war that seems to never end and has absolutely no end in sight right now. But there's no question if this were to be prolonged, and if in fact Iran is more successful with hits like they had against Qatar in the coming weeks, it could have a huge impact on the economy.
So one of the attendees points out that oil price increases affect more than gasoline prices, right? Oil and its derivatives are used in a lot of products. And here we go with inflationary pushes, not just in gasoline prices.
Fertilizer.
Fertilizer is definitely one of them. What other there's natural gas is used with for helium, and helium affects semiconductor prices.
Well,
So
manufacturing costs. I mean, I'm sitting here right next to the Lakeview Corporate Park in Pleasant Prairie. And, the reason why that was so successful is that we went out and we attracted all these energy intensive industries because of the time that we passed the bill back in 86. We energy's costs were so much lower than Commonwealth Edison at the time. So we have a lot of very energy intensive businesses, and they're affected significantly with increases in energy costs.
yeah, so right. It's not just. The everyday consumer sees it on the price of the posted at the gasoline station, a constant reminder, if you will. But there are all these underlying factors that could lead to cost pressure throughout the year. Again, depending upon how long this goes.
Yes.
I wonder whether we could, you may talk about I guess, how long does it go before things, I guess, what's the tipping point? Like we should end it now, or we have to achieve a certain goal before we end it, or is there a real timetable involved here before we try to unwind it? It seems like the Trump administration is trying to unwind it now before facing the more difficult decisions about boots on the ground. Rick, Tom?
Well, I'll go back to my first statement about whacking a wasp's nest. I think now, unfortunately, the whole issue of the Strait of Hormuz is front and center. And when is it going to be safe to ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz? Clearly, it's not safe today, and I think until that happens, I think we're in it. We're in it. We obviously were the ones that started this in terms of the attack with Israel. I don't know how we can now say, all right, we're just going to now allow them to control the Strait of Hormuz. That's a big problem.
I think there'll be a coalition of willing countries. I don't know if it's all NATO members, but a coalition does seem to be coming together that let's be optimistic that within the not too distant future that the Strait of Hormuz problem will be resolved. I sure hope so. It affects the world when you've got what is it, 20% of 27% of global oil trade and 22% of global LNG trade going through there. It affects everyone. So it's got to get fixed. And everyone, including the Europeans and everyone, China, Russia, everyone is impacted by that in some way.
Right. But Iran has now demonstrated that even if it's undergone incredible bombing and for weeks now, that it can, at least at the lowest end, harass all kinds of shipping in the Straits of Hormuz.
No question. Be real interesting to see when this 5-day period that Donald Trump has talked about ends. Something seems to be going on with respect to Hormuz. None of us know.
Right. Okay, Rick. I mean, again, I'm putting you on the spot there, but could it actually be that the U.S. did not anticipate that Iran had the capability to?
Oh, I've got to think they thought about risks in Hormuz. I don't think this was just sprung on them. The problem that the United States faces is they have to be perfect. They can't afford to have a tanker going through there and getting blown up. They've got to be perfect. And I think I've read that that's a frustration to the president, but that's the advice that he's getting, and they're right.
Okay, so
I think the president, I think that in terms of having a coalition of the willing, to the degree to which, there are constructive talks and there's a belief that this might end in the next couple of weeks, I think the likelihood goes up that you may have people that will join in. I think if people see a prolonged war or we send boots on the ground, I think there's little chance you're going to see much cooperation with other countries being willing to send ships over the Straits of Hormuz.
You sure have an economic interest to solve this problem.
They do.
Okay, but Tom, NATO doesn't have a formal role here. The EU countries certainly are wrapped in it one way or another. But do you sense that that Europe wants to now find a solution, or are forced to find a solution?
Well, going back to, I think one of the other speakers talked about the mistakes that were made and that we didn't, unlike George Bush 20 years ago, whether you agreed with him or not, with some of the moves that he made, he tried to get our allies on board. That clearly did not happen here. And to the contrary, the president spent months criticizing Europe, going after Greenland. And so there was a real suspicion there and a distrust, unfortunately, from what for 80 years have been by far our closest allies. So there's some repair work to be done there. I think they're looking at it through the prism of what's in their best interest. And I think looking through that prism, it is in their best interest to work with us, not because they want to or respect us. I think they feel completely dissed, but they also are realists. and they're thinking, okay, we can be mad, but we've got to get energy to Europe. So I think that's what's going to bring them to the table more than anything, and I think it will.
I agree.
What about the nations surrounding Iran or close to Iran? Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the UEA. What it seems like they're trying to avoid getting involved, but again, I mean, Dubai's the airport is on missile alert half the time.
So I want to help you and your viewers to remember these countries in order. Remember, Chris Barrett quit using onions. Chris Barrett quit using onions. That would give you the countries going from north to south.
Thank you.
Bahrain,
Thank you.
UAE, Oman. A good way to remember those countries coming down.
Okay.
And Saudi Arabia, obviously. This is a nightmare. It's a total nightmare for them. It affects them 1,000 times more than it affects us.
Right, but
They don't like the Iranians, and if they keep getting poked by the Iranians, they'll get involved.
Okay,
Yeah.
I guess right. Okay, well, we're drawing close to the end here. We'd like to keep it a compact discussion. I want to end by asking, your final thoughts, but also like, what are the things that you're most worried about here in the next few weeks? So, Kristin, what are you watching for that might send off alarm bells in Wisconsin?
Well, there's a lot of alarm bells going off. Thank you, Jeff, for getting me involved in this panel because I do feel like I've learned a lot just preparing for it. And sometimes I feel like confused with all the conflicting information and the, threats met with threats. And it's just hard to figure out exactly what's happening and what we can really believe. I think for customers, I've heard that the longer this goes on, there's just costs that snowball each day. And so I think from a sheer like consumer standpoint, I think if we can get some action that helps bring this to a satisfactory resolution as quickly as possible, I think that is to our benefit. That being said, there's other factors at play, and there's other costs to be reckoned with, and decisions to be balanced. So, I'll let others make that call, but I think, like I said, from a consumer perspective, the longer it goes on, and when oil's over $100 a barrel for X amount of days, that is what starts to trigger talks of recession, and when we really need to start being cautious. So that's what I'll say.
Okay, Peter, what most worries you, and any final thoughts?
Well, I think, just to summarize, really, it's a summary of what we talked about. I mean, first and foremost, obviously, our military personnel who are in harm's way. Secondly, the economy at large that would be affected tremendously if energy costs continue to soar. And then finally, low-income people who, live on the edge all the time anyway, and just struggle to be able to meet their rent and transportation costs and energy bills and everything else, child care, which is huge today. So I would say not necessarily, well, probably in that order, even frankly.
Okay, Rick?
I agree with Peter. I mean, first and foremost, I worry about our soldiers in harm's way. I worry about our economy in the short term. I worry about the polarization in this country. You wonder if it's been this bad. I'm not sure I've seen it in my life, in my experience in the world of politics. I hope that we can find ways to come together and in this 250th anniversary and celebrate the greatest country on earth. We've got to do more of that. Long term, again, I'm going to be optimistic. I hope while we're going through a difficult period right now, we're on the cusp of a major change in the world order that makes all of us safer, and that's a good thing.
All right, Tom, you got the last word before
Well,
I
we've
wrap
lost
up.
13 American soldiers at last count now, and the Marines are on their way with several ships headed that way. My biggest concern is what comes next. Are they going to be forced into action? Because we all agree that the loss of American life is something we want to avoid at all costs. Um, that's a major, major, major concern for me. Consumers right now in the United States, throughout the world, but obviously we care most about Wisconsin, and consumers in Wisconsin are feeling it right now. There's no question about that, and they're going to continue to feel it because if this ended tomorrow, which it's not going to, we're going to be paying more at the pump for a long time. So I think that's a problem. I am very concerned about our relationship with Europe, having been there in country Luxembourg that frankly adores the United States. And I think they and many of our World War II allies are just apoplectic at what they perceive as this incredible turning back our friendship to them for the last 80 years. I don't want that to get any worse. That's based on my last 3 years over there. That would be a huge loss for us. But again, domestically, it's the consumers right now. It's clearly the people who are paying at the pump and have to pay their heating bills ultimately.
Okay, well, thank you very much, panel. Really appreciate your time. We also want to thank our sponsors, HBS Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Transportation Builders Association, UW-Milwaukee, the Medical College of Wisconsin, and Spectrum. And also for this event, I want to thank our additional sponsor, the Natural Allies for a Clean Energy Future. And you can go to its website for the results of that Wisconsin poll. And I want to remind you to always go to WisPolitics.com in the lower right-hand corner. You can see our upcoming events, including upcoming events in Milwaukee, April 15th and May 5th. So thank you, everybody, for your participation, and thank you, audience, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Take care. Thank you.